The applause was deafening. Thousands of people were watching Sophie Blake smile at the camera as she stood beside a young chef named Ryan Carter. It was supposed to be the biggest night of his life. Instead, it became the night that destroyed everything. Ryan, Sophie said into her microphone, her smile suddenly disappearing. Before we announce tonight's winner, there's something the audience needs to know. Ryan looked at her, confused. What are you talking about? Sophie turned toward the giant screen behind them. A video appeared. Ryan's face went pale. The footage showed him entering the restaurant's private office late at night. Then the screen showed a missing envelope of money. The audience gasped. Ryan stared at the screen in disbelief. That isn't what happened. Sophie looked at him. Then explain why the security cameras show you taking the money. I didn't take anything. The studio became completely silent. Ryan stepped toward her. Sophie, you know me. You know I would never, she interrupted him. I trusted you, Ryan. Those 5 words hit him harder than anything else. The audience began whispering. Someone shouted from the crowd, thief. Ryan looked around desperately. No, please, you have to believe me. But Sophie didn't. Or at least, that's what everyone thought. She looked directly into the camera. Tonight, we were supposed to celebrate a talented young man. She paused. But we cannot celebrate someone who stole from the people who gave him a chance. Ryan's eyes filled with tears. Sophie, she wouldn't look at him. Within minutes, the video went viral. By morning, Ryan had lost his job. By the end of the week, every restaurant in the city knew his name. Not because he was a talented chef, because everyone called him a thief. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. His friends stopped answering. His landlord asked him to leave. And the restaurant owner refused to even hear his explanation. 3 days later, Ryan stood outside the restaurant where he had worked for 4 years. His belongings were packed into one cardboard box. He looked through the glass window one last time. Inside, people were laughing, cooking, living normal lives, while his own life had collapsed overnight. Ryan wiped his eyes. Then he whispered, I didn't do it. No one heard him. Except one person. Sophie, she was sitting in a car across the street. She had watched everything. Her hands were trembling around her phone. On the screen was a message from an unknown number. You did exactly what we asked. Now stay quiet. Sophie stared at the message. Then another one appeared. If you tell Ryan the truth, everyone will know what you did 3 years ago. Her face turned white. She immediately deleted the messages. But it was too late. Someone was watching her. And Sophie knew it. 3 years passed. Ryan disappeared. No interviews. No social media. No restaurants. Nothing. People eventually stopped talking about him. Sophie, meanwhile, became one of the most successful television hosts in the country. She had her own show, her own production company, millions of followers. Everywhere she went, cameras followed her. But every night when the studio lights turned off, she remembered Ryan's face. The way he had looked at her. The way he had begged her to believe him. And the question she had never been able to answer. Why didn't I believe him? Then, one Monday morning, Sophie walked into the studio and immediately noticed that something was different. Her producer was standing beside the conference room with a nervous expression. What happened? Sophie asked. We have a new investor. So? He bought controlling interest in the network. Sophie shrugged. Who is he? The producer hesitated. You're going to meet him in 5 minutes. Sophie walked into the conference room. Several executives were already sitting around the table. At the head of the room was a man wearing a dark suit. His back was facing her. Sophie smiled politely. "I'm Sophie Blake." The man slowly turned around. Her smile disappeared. The room seemed to stop breathing. It was Ryan. Older, calmer, different. There was no desperation in his eyes anymore. No fear, no anger, just silence. Sophie couldn't speak. Ryan stood up. "Hello, Sophie." Her voice came out as a whisper. "Ryan," he gave her a small smile. "I've been expecting you." She stared at him. "What are you doing here?" Ryan placed a folder on the table. "I own the network now." Nobody spoke. Sophie looked at the executives, then back at Ryan. "You bought this network?" "Yes, why?" Ryan leaned back in his chair. "Because 3 years ago you took something from me." Sophie swallowed. "My career?" "No." Ryan looked directly into her eyes. "My name." Sophie felt her chest tighten. Ryan opened the folder. Inside were photographs, bank records, security footage, and documents. Sophie recognized one photograph immediately. It showed her standing with a man outside the restaurant 3 years earlier. The same man who had given her the evidence against Ryan. Her hands began to shake. Ryan noticed. "You remember him?" Sophie couldn't answer. Ryan slowly pushed another photograph toward her. This one showed the restaurant's security system. But there was something different. The timestamp. The footage Sophie had shown on live television had been edited. Someone had removed 11 minutes. 11 minutes that could prove Ryan was innocent. Sophie stared at the screen. "Where did you get this?" Ryan's expression hardened. "I spent 3 years finding it." Sophie looked at him with tears forming in her eyes. "Ryan, I can explain." "No," his voice was quiet. "You had 3 years to explain." He stood up. "Now it's my turn." He walked toward the door. Sophie suddenly grabbed his arm. "Please," Ryan stopped. She looked up at him. "I never wanted to destroy you." Ryan slowly turned toward her. "Then why did you?" Sophie couldn't answer. Because the real reason was something she had never told anyone. Someone had threatened her. Someone had threatened her family, and she had believed that destroying Ryan was the only way to save them. But there was one thing Ryan still didn't know. The person who had threatened Sophie was still controlling her life. And that morning, while Sophie stood alone in the conference room, her phone vibrated. One message appeared. "He's back. Finish what you started." Sophie looked toward the door where Ryan had disappeared. For the first time in 3 years, she realized something terrifying. Ryan hadn't returned just to take revenge. He had returned because he had finally discovered who really destroyed his life. And that person was much closer to Sophie than either of them realized. Sophie couldn't move. The message on her phone was still glowing. "He's back. Finish what you started." Her fingers trembled. She quickly locked the screen and slipped the phone into her pocket. But when she looked up, Ryan was standing in the doorway. He had seen her face. "What happened?" he asked. "Nothing." Ryan stared at her. "You've always been a terrible liar." Sophie looked away. 3 years ago, she would have argued. Now, she couldn't. Ryan walked back into the room and placed the folder on the table. "I want the truth, Sophie," she whispered. "You don't understand." "Then explain it." "I can't." "Why?" Sophie finally looked at him. "Because if I tell you, someone will get hurt." Ryan's expression hardened. "You think I wasn't hurt?" Sophie closed her eyes. "I know." "No, you don't." His voice cracked for the first time. "You lost a television show. I lost my entire life." Sophie looked down. Ryan continued. "For 3 years, people called me a thief. My mother couldn't even go to the grocery store without hearing someone whisper about me. My younger brother dropped out of college because he couldn't afford it after I lost everything. Sophie began crying silently. I didn't know. Ryan laughed bitterly. That's the problem. You never asked. He pushed the folder toward her. Now I'm going to ask you one question. Sophie looked up. Who gave you the footage? She froze. Ryan immediately noticed. You know. No, you hesitated. I don't know what you're talking about. Ryan leaned closer. His name is Marcus. Sophie stopped breathing. Ryan smiled faintly. That's what I thought. Marcus Hale had been the network's executive producer 3 years ago. He was also Sophie's closest friend, the man who had helped launch her career, the man who had given her the evidence against Ryan, and the man who had disappeared from the network shortly after Ryan's downfall. Sophie stood up. Ryan, you need to stop. Why? Because Marcus isn't someone you can fight. Ryan stared at her. You're afraid of him. She didn't answer. That was enough. Ryan picked up his phone. I found the original security footage. Sophie looked at him. What? And I found something else. He showed her a photograph. It was Marcus meeting the restaurant's owner on the same night the money disappeared. Sophie stared at it. That can't be. Why not? Because Marcus told me he was in Chicago that night. Ryan's eyes narrowed. And you believed him. Sophie looked devastated. Ryan continued. I spent 3 years looking for proof. But every time I got close, someone erased the evidence. He placed another document on the table. Someone had access to the network servers. Sophie looked at the document. Her face went pale. The access records showed that the edited footage had been uploaded from Sophie's own account. I didn't do that, she whispered. Ryan nodded. I know. She looked at him in shock. You believe me? I believe the evidence. Suddenly, Sophie's phone rang. Marcus? She stared at the screen. Ryan looked at her. Answer it. She hesitated. Put it on speaker. Sophie answered. Hello? Marcus's voice came through. Did you meet Ryan? Sophie didn't respond. Marcus laughed softly. I know you did. Ryan's eyes narrowed. Marcus continued. Tell him the past should stay buried. Ryan stepped closer to the phone. Why don't you tell me yourself? Silence, then Marcus said something that made Sophie's blood run cold. Because you still don't know what happened to your father. Ryan froze. His face changed instantly. My father? Sophie looked at him. Marcus laughed. You thought your father died because of an accident? Ryan's voice became cold. What did you do? I didn't do anything. The call suddenly ended. Ryan stood completely still. Sophie whispered, Ryan. He turned toward her. You knew about my father? No, you knew something. I swear I didn't. Ryan stepped back. Everyone keeps telling me I'm missing part of the story. Sophie wiped her tears. Then let's find it. Ryan stared at her. You're going to help me? Sophie nodded. Yes, why? Because I'm tired of being afraid. For the first time, Ryan saw something different in her eyes. Not guilt. Fear. Real fear. That evening, they returned to the old restaurant. The building had been abandoned for years. Ryan unlocked the back door. Inside, everything was covered in dust. Sophie followed him. Why did you bring me here? Because the original security system was never destroyed. They entered the basement. Ryan switched on an old computer. The screen flickered. Folders appeared. Security footage. Financial records. Employee files. Then, Ryan found a folder named August 14 Private. He clicked it. A video began playing. The restaurant owner appeared on screen. He was speaking to Marcus, but there was another person in the room. Sophie leaned closer. Then she gasped. The third person was Sophie's father. Ryan stared at the screen. What the hell? The video continued. Sophie's father placed an envelope on the table. Marcus opened it. Inside were photographs. Then Sophie's father said something that changed everything. If Ryan finds out the truth, both our families are finished. Ryan stopped the video. He looked at Sophie. She was crying. My father knew Marcus? Ryan nodded. And he knew about the money. Sophie shook her head. No, Ryan restarted the video. This time they listened carefully. Sophie's father said, Ryan's father discovered everything. We need to make sure his son takes the blame. Ryan's face went completely white. My father discovered what? Before the video could continue, the computer suddenly shut down. The lights went out. Sophie grabbed Ryan's arm. Ryan, a loud crash, came from upstairs. Someone was inside the restaurant. Ryan pulled Sophie behind him. Footsteps moved closer. Slowly, then the basement door opened. A man stood in the doorway. Marcus. He looked at them and smiled. I was wondering how long it would take you to find this place. Ryan stepped forward. You destroyed my life. Marcus shook his head. No, he looked at Sophie. She did. Sophie stared at him in horror. Marcus smiled. Because she believed me. Then he pulled out his phone. A video appeared on the screen. It showed Sophie 3 years ago standing alone in the network's editing room, and in her hand was the original security footage. Ryan looked at her. His face fell. Sophie, she couldn't speak, because the video showed her deleting something from the original footage. Ryan stared at the screen. Tell me that's fake. Sophie began crying. I can explain. Ryan slowly stepped away from her. Marcus smiled, and Sophie realized the truth too late. The video had been edited, but this time it was edited to destroy her. Ryan stared at the screen. The video showed Sophie deleting the original security footage. For 3 years, he had imagined the moment when he would finally confront the person who destroyed him. He had imagined anger. He had imagined revenge. But he had never imagined this. You lied to me, he whispered. Sophie was crying. I didn't. Ryan looked at her. I just watched you delete the evidence, because Marcus forced me. Marcus laughed from the doorway. Still making excuses, Sophie? Ryan turned toward him. Enough. Marcus stepped into the room. You want the truth, Ryan? He smiled. Your father discovered that I was stealing money from the network. He threatened to expose me. Ryan's jaw tightened. So you framed me. I needed someone nobody would believe. Ryan looked at Sophie, and she was the perfect person to use. Sophie shook her head. No, that's not what happened. Marcus looked at her. Tell him. Sophie wiped her tears. He threatened my family. Ryan looked confused. What? Sophie took a deep breath. 3 years ago, Marcus showed me photographs of my younger brother leaving school. He knew where my mother worked. He knew everything about my family. She looked at Ryan. He told me that if I didn't accuse you publicly, he would destroy them. Ryan's anger slowly disappeared. Sophie continued. I tried to find another way. I copied the original footage and hid it. Ryan stared at her. Then why did the video show you deleting it? Because Marcus created that recording. Marcus's smile faded. Sophie pointed toward the computer. He knew I had hidden the original footage. Ryan looked at Marcus. So where is it? Marcus said nothing. Ryan smiled coldly. You made one mistake. Marcus frowned. What? You thought I spent 3 years looking for evidence without learning how to protect it. Ryan pulled out his phone. A recording was already running. Everything Marcus had said was captured. Marcus's expression changed. Ryan held up the phone. You just confessed. Marcus lunged toward him. Ryan stepped back. But before Marcus could reach him, police officers entered the basement. Marcus froze. Ryan looked at Sophie. You called them? She nodded. I knew Marcus would come after us. Marcus looked around desperately. You think this proves everything? An officer handcuffed him. It proves enough to start. Marcus was taken away. But Ryan wasn't celebrating. He looked at the old computer. There was one thing you said. Sophie looked at him. Your father discovered everything. Ryan nodded. What did my father discover? Sophie hesitated. He discovered that Marcus wasn't working alone. Ryan's expression changed. Who else? Sophie looked at him. Your father never told me the name. Ryan sighed. Then he noticed something on the floor. An old envelope. He picked it up. His name was written on it. Ryan Carter. He opened it. Inside was a photograph of his father standing beside another man. Ryan stared at the photograph. He recognized him immediately. It was the owner of the restaurant where Ryan had worked. The same man who had fired him 3 years earlier. Ryan's hands began shaking. He knew. Sophie nodded. And there's more. Ryan looked at her. The money that supposedly disappeared from the restaurant, she took out a document. It was never stolen. Ryan stared at the bank records. The money had been transferred into an offshore account. The account belonged to the restaurant owner. Ryan finally understood. The entire scandal had been planned. Marcus had needed a scapegoat. The restaurant owner had needed someone to blame. And Sophie had been forced to become the face of the lie. But there was still one question. Why did they choose me? Sophie looked down. Because your father was investigating them. Ryan closed his eyes. For 3 years, he had believed his life had been destroyed because of one terrible night. Now he realized it had started much earlier. His father had been trying to expose corruption. And Ryan had been punished for it. Weeks later, the truth became public. The original footage was released. The financial records were handed to investigators. Marcus and the restaurant owner were arrested. The network publicly apologized. Ryan's name was cleared. People who had once called him a thief now called him a survivor. But Ryan didn't feel like celebrating. One evening, he stood outside the same restaurant where his life had fallen apart. Sophie walked toward him. I didn't know if you'd come. Ryan looked at her. I almost didn't. She nodded. I understand. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Sophie said, I know I can never give you back those 3 years. Ryan looked away. No, I know saying sorry isn't enough. No, she swallowed. But I'm still sorry. Ryan finally looked at her. You made a terrible choice. Sophie nodded. I know, but you also spent 3 years trying to fix it. Tears filled her eyes. I was afraid. So was I. They stood silently. Then Ryan said something Sophie never expected. I forgive you. She looked at him. Really? Ryan nodded. But forgiveness doesn't mean we forget. I don't want to forget. A small smile appeared on his face. Good, he looked toward the city lights, because I don't want to be the man who spent his whole life taking revenge. Sophie smiled through her tears. And who do you want to be? Ryan looked at her. Someone who gets his life back. He walked away. Sophie watched him disappear into the crowd. For the first time in 3 years, neither of them was running from the past. Ryan had lost 3 years. Sophie had lost her innocence. But both had learned the same lesson. Sometimes the person who destroys your life isn't your biggest enemy. Sometimes they're just another victim of someone else's lie. And sometimes the strongest revenge isn't destroying the people who hurt you. It's building a life so good that they no longer have the power to hurt you. The end.